Over the summer of 2021, writer and artist Nathan O'Donnell spent several weeks on the Tipperary shoreline of Lough Derg, exploring the history, ecology and topography of the lake as a site for trade, leisure, health, tourism and gathering stories about swimming on the lake. The following interview was recorded at the beginning of Nathan's second visit to Lough Derg in the summer of 2021. The Book of Invasions is the resulting publication from Nathan's residency. The book was devised in consultation with local respondents and with the participation of a number of swimmers who provided interviews about their experience on the lake. Compiled by Nathan and designed by Clare Bell, the Book of Invasions combines elements of personal essay and modular writing with transcripts of interviews and archival sources, serving as a repository of place names, memories, customs, and daily rituals on the edges of Lough Derg.
So the reason I was interested in the call for the river residencies was the prospect of undertaking work of the kind I've been interested in for a while, but in this sort of rural setting. A lot of the work that I've done to date has been urban, has been really focused in Dublin, has been centred in Dublin. So I suppose part of my interest was just in thinking about what the kind of publishing that I'm interested in, how that can kind of play out in a rural setting. I guess I was really interested in the lake as itself a kind of a resource that everybody participates in. I'm here to talk to people about swimming, but there's an awful lot of other activities that bring people together on the lake. People are clubbing together and forming groups and going out into the water together, even though there's certainly the way they've described it, people feel as though they're on their own in the water, but there is a kind of solidarity or something to being out on the lake as a kind of unit. So there's this kind of community that just happens through the water, through the lake. The first residency place in midsummer, it was the latter part of July. The lake is really at its most populous, I suppose. So I was sited here in Terry Glass, but I was kind of visiting other swimming spots the whole way along, largely along the Tipperary coastline, but kind of moving over, we did go over into Galway and to Clare as well. This was a moment when there was more people swimming than had been swimming in decades, it seems. When I was growing up, actually, I remember when the lake it was intermittently polluted, or there were swimming bans and things like. It wasn't necessarily a pastime that a lot of people were taking part in, and there was a little bit of a fear of the lake, and I think that lasted for quite a while. I guess it's the combination of the weather this year, also lockdown, the fact that people weren't going abroad. People have really been paying more attention to the resources that are available to them, the things that are local to them, thinking out through and rethinking what these resources are. So I think people are really looking at the lake in a different way. It was this real a sense of people were like a sense of rediscovery about the lake and about swimming on the lake. So, in terms of the people I was talking to, it was really a mix. Quite a few people who were interested in local history. that was one way in for me. There are many people you speak to who just have never swum, and particularly it seems there's obviously around the lake there was a lot of farmers, and some of the people I was talking to were saying that kind of leisure activity just wouldn't have occurred to people to think of using the lake in that way. But then others, were talking about generations of swimming. And there were the regattas that used to happen on Lough Derg up until the 70s, if I'm not mistaken. Regattas were a big annual event with kind of competitions, swimming competitions and activities, and they just brought people to the lake. There was this sort of festive environment around it. So looking at those histories was really interesting. But then also talking to people who are swimming today, people who are swimming in a serious way, or out for every day, almost athletic approach to the lake and using the lake in that way. But then others, one of the things that seems to have been a recent development is these swimming clubs, these swimming groups. I encountered one here. There's a swimming group in Dromineer. There's another one down in Killaloo. They come and they agree a particular time to be on the lake, and it's this sort of social community thing that has just sprung up spontaneously. Ultimately, it's drawing people back to the lake, and there is a sort of a new energy or enthusiasm for swimming. That's it's just interesting to watch. I'm into the beginning of the second residency at this stage. Now, we had envisaged the residencies as having been, the first was research and the second was production. They both have been kind of happening simultaneously. The conversations I'm having, including some recorded interviews with swimmers, in some ways it's been gathering material, and I have been writing right the way through. With the second residency, we're really trying to I suppose begin to put shape on the design of the publication. So I'm working with a designer, Clare Bell, who I've worked with on several projects before, and we've really devised a methodology for working together that focuses a lot on place. Good part of what we've done has been participatory, and we would be thinking a lot about what it means to use editing and publishing as a kind of participatory device. In the original kind of forecast for what this residency would be, we did anticipate that there would be something that looks more like what we're familiar with as participation. So possibly workshops, town hall style meetings, bringing people together on the lake in a kind of formalized and organized way. And we've had to rethink that, obviously, because of COVID, because of the restrictions, because we can't bring people together necessarily in this way or that way. Funnily enough, though, the experience of the first residency really seemed to suggest an alternative way of working anyway. The people wanted to kind of touch base on a day and see what the weather looked like, and maybe we would go on the morning or the afternoon, and there was a kind of fluidity and informality to the way in which I was engaging with people. And the way in which people encounter the lake, I think, is really important to think about. So in some regards, a kind of formalized, structured approach to participation didn't feel natural or right in this context. If I was going to respond genuinely to the character of the lake or the fabric of the kind of relationships people have to the water and to one another, then it actually was going to need to be more slower and more informal and more fluid. People are probably having to rethink participation in lots of ways at the moment, and perhaps those more individual or intimate encounters, we might come to value those in ways that's just as important as the kind of the mass encounter, the kind of collective action. I mean, the standout moment so far has been just getting into the water. I hadn't swum in the lake since I was a kid, and so I arrived, obviously brought me togs, whatever, but actually I wound up getting in as a result of a miscommunication. So I had been talking to a historian who's been really helpful, and she had made contact with a person who was a serious swimmer, is out there every day. The person who I was going to meet had gotten it into their head that I was getting into the lake with them. Like, I arrived totally unprepared, and it was suddenly like, we're getting in. So I just wasn't prepared for it, but that was almost the right way to do it, you know. It was just magic being out there. It had just so many conversations about what it means to be in the lake, what it does to your body just to be in that kind of that space, and just after the fine weather. So the lake was like silk. It was amazing. It was the most beautiful swim I've ever had. In the first residency, I felt drawn to ask questions about ownership of the lake. Who has access to the lake, who doesn't? Can we conceive of it as a public resource when so much of the frontage is privatised, and when even those spaces, those few apertures onto the lake are sort of policed in terms of who can use them and who can't? All of these questions are really being brought to bear here, and they're kind of informing how we're thinking about the process. You know, people are very aware and alive to these questions about basically who gets to use the lake, who gets to be on the lake. There's the lake as it's conceived by people who are here for leisure, tourists maybe, who can afford to take out a cruiser and spend a couple of weeks on the lake. Or there's the version of the lake that's as it's seen by people who've lived here for generations. There's the version of the lake as I knew it coming out from Nina when we would go to Drumineer. There are all of these competing versions of the lake, I guess. And so for me, swimming is kind of a lens for thinking about and looking at those moments of contestation. For me, I think swimming is something that is inherently kind of democratic. It's something that anybody can come and get into the water. Kind of an expression of a democratic view or model of what the lake can be.
When you get into the lake, even if you're not thinking about it, you're taking part in this collective public ritual. You're taking part in all of this history, myth, politics, engineering. Swimming is the lake's one activity in which anyone is free to take part. The act is sometimes social, sometimes spiritual, sometimes disciplined, sometimes therapeutic. It's so straightforward. You just get in the water, and yet it's inexplicable, unconveyable. It's like you're participating in a form of bodily dispersal.